accumulating in the earth, on the earth, because of human emissions. So these are things that we are creating through fossil fuel use, is roughly equal to the heat that would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs exploding across the planet every day. That just gives you some idea of the heat that we are causing on our planet today. So, and a big amount of this is due to the fossil fuels, of course, the coal, the oil, the natural gas. By the way, the natural gas is methane. A lot of people don't know that. And some people say, well, you know, why are you doing this? Here are three of the reasons. This is my daughter, Kirsten, and my two granddaughters at Climbers Run in southern Lancaster County. I want to try to ensure that they, as well as my grandson, who's now 7 months old in Bend, Oregon, from Drew, who's in on the production here today. I want to make sure that they have the possibility of the type of life that we have had as far as climate is concerned in the future. But if we don't do something significant in the next 10 years, their lives will be nothing like our lives have been as far as climate is concerned. Here are the basics. Damage is real. It's happening now. Just yesterday or on the weekend, you heard about the terrible tornadoes in Iowa. This is the beginning of March. Just remember, this is not something we usually see in March. Fires, and then out in the West. This past weekend, again, down in Florida, they had terrible fires, etc. So it's happening now, it's happening here. It's not just overseas. Human activity emits greenhouse gases, a lot of the CO2 into the atmosphere, trapping the heat, and that's what's altering the climate. I say that it does pose a catastrophic threat to the planet and human health, but with a concerted action quickly, we can create healthy and safe communities for our families and our children. And there's lots of major co-benefits: improved air quality, better physical and mental health, which I'll be talking about. We could spend 2 hours just on this slide, but climate drivers are increased temperatures, precipitation extremes, extreme weather events, and sea level rise. And that, of course, bleeds over into environmental and institutional context and social behavioral context, the exposure pathways, and the health outcomes, which we'll get into in more detail. This is what's going on as far as major climate changes in the US, but I hope I don't have to remind you folks, this is going on in the rest of the world also. But in our area, for example, we're seeing increasing floods. And let me just give you some statistics on that. Extreme rainfall events in Pennsylvania have increased over 52% in the last 60 years. Sea levels will increase by predictions over a foot or more by 2050. That's more than has happened in the last 100 years. And this is from NOAA. Sea levels increased fastest in 2,000 years over the Earth. More ag industry and home damage will be done. And by 2050, and again, that's less than 20 years from now, we're going to be, or 30 years from now, we're going to be seeing an increase of 40 million migrants from Southeast Asia alone due to flooding. And this is another thing that I didn't know about until I was doing research on this. Every 1 inch of sea level rise increases possible storm surges on the coast by 4 to 5 feet. So if we're going to get an increased foot or more by 2050, you can imagine what the coast is going to be like. I mean, Hurricane Sandy will look like a minor storm. The hurricanes, of course, are becoming more significant. We know what's happening out west with wildfires. The drought in the Southwest, now there are studies saying it's the worst in 1,200 years, 1,200 years, the worst drought. Definitions: weather versus climate. Weather is short-term change that you hear on the breaking news on TV every day. Climate is the average weather over 30 or more years. And here's an example of it here. This is the Upsala Glacier in Patagonia, 1928, 2004. All ice here, all water here, except for up on the mountains. This is not a spoof. This was taken in the same season of the year. Secondhand smoke exposure. I use this as an analogy with climate change. Back in the days when Ronald Reagan and John Wayne were promoting cigarettes on TV, we didn't really know about the health effects. We know about the health effects now of climate change, but they're only going to get much, much worse in the future. So what is this greenhouse effect? The sun beats down on the earth, the radiant waves and the heat bounce back up into the atmosphere, everything's fine. But now we have this greenhouse gas layer around the earth, again, predominantly human-made from our fossil fuels, and that's keeping the heat closer to the earth. That's a big problem. Here's some of the greenhouse gases. Water vapor. Actually, water vapor is the most abundant greenhouse gas, and it's rising as the climate warms. But this doesn't cause global warming. It's a consequence of it. We know about CO2, and we'll be talking more about that. Methane, natural gas, sources, agriculture, natural gas distribution, landfills, nitrous oxides from fertilizer use, industrial processes, fossil fuels, and vehicle emissions. Ozone, O3, we'll be talking more about this. This is smog in the summertime, volatile organic compounds, and on we go. These are some of the greenhouse gases. This is an interesting study that was done between November 2012 and December 2013 with over 2,200 peer-reviewed climate articles by over 9,000 authors. This is supposed to be a pie chart. This is the piece of the pie of the one author rejecting man-made global warming. So it's real, we know it, it's science. Where is the global warming going? Over 93% of it ends up in the ocean. Remember this because this is going to be very important for some of the subsequent slides. I have a couple in here on methane, natural gas. Of course, we get that, a lot of that from fracking. We can prevent 100 billion cubic feet of methane leaks if we're just more smart about how we do this. There's lots of leaks right at the site. And of course, you know that methane is burned off. That puts it into the atmosphere. Just a waste. That 100 billion cubic feet yearly is more than enough gas to cook a meal for every man, woman, and child on the planet. I pick on New England because I'm originally from just south of Boston. And this is an example of our poor infrastructure. Every one of these little round circles is an example of methane leaks from the pipelines around Boston. Multiply this by all of the older cities in the world, and you can see how much methane we're losing from that. It's amazing to me that we don't see more explosions than we have been. Also, don't forget the permafrost, especially in the Arctic, is melting incredibly quickly, and that's putting a lot of methane into the atmosphere also. CO2, carbon dioxide, concentrations from 10,000 BC. It's measured in parts per million. You can see it never got above 300 until the Industrial Revolution really got whipping up. And now you can see it's almost a straight line up. By 2100, if we don't in the next 10 years make some dramatic changes to our uses in our coal, oil, and natural gas, this is where we're going to be by all predictions. 900 parts per million. The Earth will not be like it is today if that occurs. Some people say, well, that's not that far back. How about 800,000 years ago? These are from ice core data. Again, never above 300 until we get the Industrial Revolution really kicked up. And we're at about 417 or 418 parts per million today. Global warming causes asthma. And for those who already have asthma, it makes it worse. In communities with high ozone concentrations, and Lancaster is one of them, by the way, in the summertime, the relative risk of developing asthma in children playing 3 or more outdoor sports is over 3 times that compared with children playing no sports, which we don't suggest, or playing indoor sports. Respiratory disorders, including asthma and allergies. I want you to understand, and this is going to be important later when we start talking about the vectors for disease, that the growing season in Lancaster County, for example, has increased by 2 to 3 weeks just since 1970. So all of the pollen, all of the plants, they're moving up the coast. They're creating more and more problems with allergies. By 2050, the thoughts are, the studies have shown that by 2050, half of all of the patients that come to a doctor's office will have seasonal allergies just because of these changes. Don't forget, indoor mold and fungal growth with all of the humidity and dampness in the homes, and that, of course, exacerbates all of these problems also. Your local coal burning power plant has a new filter. His name is Danny. This is not a joke. About 1 in 10 children in the United States of America in 2022 carry a diagnosis of asthma. And it's made worse, of course, by the fossil fuels, or can be created by the fossil fuels. These are the Pennsylvania air quality non-attainment areas. You can see Lancaster is in both of these. The particulates, by the way, are parts per million. These are soot particles, if you will, coming from the fossil fuel sites. The ozone, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but this is in the summertime and is known as smog, if you will. So you can see that we are not in good areas as far as that's concerned. This is New York City on a hot summer day. You can see here some of the people that are at increased risk, but we'll get into that more detail later also. This is the inflamed airway from the ozone. You can see how red it is. This is a healthy airway, not as red. So what causes ozone on the hot summer days? Volatile organics, nitrous oxygen, or nitrous oxides, and heat, the ultraviolet rays. That increases the ground level ozone. You can see here when the temperatures get up into the 90s, the ozone concentration really goes up. And it's not just respiratory issues we're talking about. Increased ozone due to the increasing temperature affects the cardiovascular system, increasing the risk of heart arrhythmias, heart attacks, deep vein thrombosis, etc. A majority of Americans think that carbon pollution from power plants is regulated. They're wrong. I draw an analogy here to what we did with sewage in our country back in the late 1700s and early 1800s. We just dribbled it out into the street or into the backyards, We realized then how many diseases could be caused from that. And now we know how many problems, diseases can be caused from the power plants and the carbon pollution. What's causing some of the sea level increases? For those of you who have ever stepped into the kitchen and heated anything up, you realize you don't have to boil water for the water to expand. So just heating the water can cause thermal expansion. And we know what the CO2 and the sun rays are doing to the oceans these days. So that's one reason. The other reason, of course, is that the glaciers and the ice are melting. So those are the two main reasons why we're seeing sea level change, increase. Some people say, well, I don't really care about the rest of the world. What's happening in Pennsylvania? Well, Pennsylvania is number 4 here in over 200 million metric tons of carbon dioxide that the state, we in the state, are putting up in emissions. And this was from 1916, or from 2016 rather. So you can see that we're up near the top as far as they're concerned. Impacts on agriculture, reducing overall crop yields, decreasing rates of photosynthesis, and increasing water demand. Why is that important? Grain yields decrease by 10% for every 1 degree centigrade increase in global average surface temperature. Most people think 1 of anything doesn't make any difference. It makes a big difference. 1 degree centigrade is about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, by the way. And if we go into 2 and 3 degree centigrade increase, then we're going to have significantly more problems with trying to feed the population of the Earth. And don't forget, predictions are that there will be an increase of 2.5 billion people on Earth by 2050. Today, in sub-Saharan Africa, if you want water to drink, you send the ladies down to the water pit. You hope there's water in the pit. You don't care if it's clean or without infectious pathogens, but you just hope there's water there so that you can bring this back to drink it that day. By 2100, so the end of this century, with business as usual climate change scenarios, nearly 1/3 of the world's land surface may be at risk for extreme drought. Let's bring it closer to home. Again, some people think, I don't really care what happens in sub-Saharan Africa or, Indonesia or Malawi or whatever, but I just care about what happens in my own backyard. Well, this is Pittsburgh, Allegheny River, but Pennsylvania is rated number 1 in the country for combined sewer overflow. What does that mean? In, again, the old days, when they were setting up the stormwater sewers and the sewage systems from industries and from homes, they had to have an overflow. So they created the system that way. So today, if we have 3 inches of rainfall in a couple of hours, it has to go somewhere. It goes into either the Conestoga Creek, or if you live in Harrisburg, it goes into the Susquehanna. Again, this is the Allegheny River in Pittsburgh. You don't want to be doing something like this, obviously, after something like this happens. And don't forget, if the flooding is significant enough, this goes downstream onto the farmers' fields and into the produce and onto the produce that's being grown there. So it's happening. Heat in children. Emergency room visits for heat illnesses increased by 133% just between 1997 and 2006. Almost half of these were children and adolescents. Young children don't regulate their body temperatures like adults. They're not young adults. Their bodies are different, and they also spend more time outdoors. 2003, European heat wave. Again, a lot of people think oh, the rest of the world lives like we do. They have air conditioning when it gets hot. A lot of the people in this part of the earth do not have air conditioning. So they either have to find a cave or a cellar to hide in. And obviously, if they're elderly, chronically ill, pregnant, a little child, that one is not easy to do. This year, 2003, there were over 70,000 excess deaths in Europe. Last year, there was another heat wave. It wasn't quite as bad as this, but according to a study led by climate expert Dr. Peter Stott, if greenhouse gas emissions continue to increase by the 2040s, so that's not too far away, more than half of the European summers will be hotter than the summer that I just showed you. And by the end of this century, a summer as hot as that of 2003 will be considered unusually cool. And this isn't just going to be happening, obviously, in Europe. Heat-related disorders, many of you are familiar with them: rashes, cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. I hope you never have had that, or will never have that. And again, the elderly, infants and children, pregnant women, chronically ill, those in poverty because they can't afford air conditioning, whatever. Urban area dwellers, lots of tar around, lots of asphalt shingles, and so forth. They're at an elevated risk because they retain the heat and they don't have a lot of trees around. The West burn season has grown 50% longer in the past 40 years. How do I know this firsthand? Here's Drew, and he's in on the conference here today. He's a U.S. forestry ranger in Bend, Oregon. These are some of the forest fires that he's fought in up there. I want to bring to your attention the trees here. You see the gray trees and tree stumps that are still standing? These have been killed by the pine beetle and by climate changes, things moving up the coast. And these trees left standing like this are a perfect setup for the dumb camper who doesn't put out his campfire, or for a lightning strike that comes down. And then more and more fires, of course, are happening. Deforestation is responsible for about 15% of the greenhouse gases. That's more than the total amount emitted by all the cars, trucks, and buses on the planet. This deforestation is not just from forest fires, obviously. If you're in the Amazon, Brazil, Indonesia, a lot of trees are being cut down to plant rice or some other products that they can try and make some money and produce some food from. So, twin tornadoes, extreme weather events. Up until about 5 years ago, there had never been in the month of February a tornado in Lancaster County. That year there was. The very next year, there was a tornado just over the boundary on the western side in Wrightsville, on the other side of Susquehanna, in the month of February. So again, the extreme weather events are coming our way. I can't tell you when the next one's going to happen, but they're here. So why is that? A warming planet increases the frequency and severity of extreme weather events. As ocean temperatures increase, they evaporate more moisture into the sky. Warmer air can also hold a lot more water vapor, so we get more and bigger storms and more extreme weather. Ask your friends in Louisiana, they know about this. 80,000 acres of wetlands are lost each year on the coasts of the United States by intensifying coastal storms and sea level rise. Obviously, part of the problem here is that it allows that storm surge, which is increasing because of sea level rises, to come more onshore and do more damage inward. Don't forget Hurricane Sandy off the New Jersey coast. My sister-in-law, this is not her home. But she had in her living room, she lived right on the coast of New Jersey. She had water in her living room about 6 feet high. You can see the water level here was probably 3 feet high. But this is a photomicrograph of black mold. This is all black mold in here. And I'm guessing that this house had to be torn down because this black mold is not just on the inside, it's all through the walls, the basement, everything. So obviously, if this gets in your lungs, it can kill you. That's why he's dressed this way. I haven't mentioned much about psychological effects, but you don't have to be in a war to get post-traumatic stress disorder. If you didn't have insurance for this home and it had to be pulled down, you can imagine the mental anguish, anxiety, depression, and so forth. Remember I told you that global warming was ending up in the oceans? Here's 1850 and estimates to 2100. Dissolved CO2 in the oceans. I told you it's going up. That's decreasing the pH. So the oceans are becoming more acidic. Again, until I started doing research into this, I didn't realize that over 50% of the drugs that are used in your physician's office and the things that physicians use in the hospital for you come from things that lived in the ocean, whether it's plants, whether it's animals, fish, etc. So if you like, for example, shellfish, as the pH goes down, the shells don't form as well. So we know what's happening to coral reefs. They're dying across the world. All of this is being made worse by the acidity of the water. Again, we can stop this by cutting out our fossil fuel use as quickly as possible. Back to New England again. 10-foot rise in ocean level. This is not a storm surge now. This is ocean level. This is predicted for about 100 years from now. All of these areas in light blue will be underwater. So Boston University, Fenway Park, Harvard, Cambridge, the airport, of course, all of the coastal docking stations, etc. All of this will be underwater if, again, we don't do something very quickly with fossil fuel use. Climate change promotes vector-borne disease. What's this all about? Warmer temperatures. Remember I told you also increased growing season. It's not just for pollen, but for these critters too. Increased precipitation, increased humidity. And here we have some of them in our area. Even in this larval stage, this tick, this deer tick, can give us disease. Mosquito, you can see the blood in the abdomen of this mosquito, hopefully not giving this person a West Nile. So Lyme disease, of course, is from the deer tick. This is an adult deer tick here. And I just want to give you this one example here from 2001 to 2014. Every one of these black dots is a confirmed case of Lyme disease. So 2001, Pennsylvania, you can see 2014. Every county now in Pennsylvania has had documented cases of Lyme disease, and they're going up each year. And actually, my son just found a deer tick on himself a couple of weeks ago up in Bend, Oregon, he told me. These are things that we don't usually see this early in the season. Dengue fever, otherwise known as bone break fever, used to only be down in the Caribbean and down in southern Florida and southern Texas. I want you to pay attention to all of the red and blue areas here. Those are areas that today have species of mosquitoes that can transmit dengue fever and Zika disease. So you can see Lancaster County. It only is going to take time for the disease to make its way up. And you can be sitting on your veranda. If you don't have a screened-in porch, you can be bitten by mosquitoes that are here today, and you can get dengue fever and Zika disease. Here are the species for the Zika. And again, you can see they're already all through Pennsylvania, and they're through Southeast Pennsylvania in our area. I haven't mentioned much about community health, but obviously you know that with severe weather events, violence and crime can break out, increased social instability, decreased community cohesion. By the way, I just want to be aside here a little bit. Did any of you take a walk in the 74-degree record-breaking heat yesterday? The past history of that date back in 1946, the year that I was born, had 72 degrees, but yesterday was the warmest in our area. And I'm getting more and more of those types of events when I give my talks, unfortunately. So the earth is definitely getting warmer. But there's some of you out there who say, hey, you know, by Wednesday, we're supposed to have maybe some sleet or snow. How come if all this global warming is happening? Well, remember I said the oceans are warming. There's milder air over the oceans. It's forcing the jet stream further north and east. There's still some cold air up in the Arctic. It has to go somewhere. It ends up in what's called the cross-polar flow or the polar vortex. And here you can see it comes down into the middle of the United States. So yes, we're still going to have winters. They're not going to last as long. They're not going to be as cold, but we're still going to have some of that weather. Loss of Arctic sea ice from 1850 to 2018. You can see that it really has started going down in the last couple of decades from an average amount of about 270,000 down in 2018. It was down to about 100,000, and it's even lower than that now. The collapse of the western ice sheet in Antarctica is on its way. And of course, that's increasing sea level too. So it's not just the Arctic that's melting, the Antarctic also. This is an interesting map, I think. This is the average winter temperature trends in degrees Fahrenheit per century. Everything in dark red here shows a 3.1 to a 6.0 degree increase in average temperature. So you can see Massachusetts, Lancaster County, Bend, Oregon, a lot of the areas in the northern parts of the United States have seen tremendous changes in the last century. And I can tell you that if I was in Massachusetts growing up today, I'd be skating on the ice. There's no ice up there now. And you're lucky if you can find ice in Lancaster County for more than a couple of days in the winter today. Oh, let me just go back on that. If you talk to somebody from Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, they don't know what we're talking about because they really haven't seen this trend in winter temperature increase over the centuries. So you all know what the answers are. The answers are going to alternative energy generation, renewable energy, solar, wind, and we'll get into some of the others. But we want to start leveling the playing field. So stop externalizing health and climate cost of carbon. Here's a cartoon picture, if you will. This big guy here is about 2 feet taller than this little guy here. The big guy is fossil fuels. The little guy is renewable energy. We need to stop subsidizing the fossil fuel folks. And I think I have here some data on that. In 2019 alone, Pennsylvania gave $3.8 billion in fossil fuel subsidies. The world subsidized fossil fuels by $5.9 trillion in 2020 alone. US banks pumped over $1.9 trillion into fossil fuels just since 2016. And Renewables, by the way, have become much cheaper. In the last 10 years, wind power has decreased by 70%, and solar power has decreased by 90%. We need to give that group some help. Carbon dividends. I'm a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby, and I want to read you these two paragraphs. By the way, there are some conservatives out there who also agree with carbon dividends. These were Reaganites, most of them. Some of them are still living, and they also agree with what I'm about to tell you. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act would put a price on fossil fuels extracted from the ground in the United States or imported to the United States. It comes back then to every American of all ages to help pay our daily costs, increase the market-driven economy, creating 2.1 million new jobs, decreasing emissions by at least 40% in the first 12 years alone, and improve our health by saving lives and reducing pollution. Because it comes back to us, it is therefore a dividend and not a tax on fossil fuels. 57 nations around the earth had implemented or scheduled implementation by 2019. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, praises the importance of carbon pricing as a crucial tool in any cost-effective climate change mitigation strategy, as it provides a mechanism for linking climate action to economic development, and it can stimulate the innovation of new clean technologies. Renewable energy can give us this amount yearly. This is what we use yearly. World energy use, 16 terawatts, 16 trillion watts. Just solar alone could give us 36,000 terawatts. And this is not a solar panel on every roof, by the way. This is just where it's reasonable to do so. Wind alone could give us more than what we're using today. Geothermal, groundwater, hydro, dams, etc. Ocean energy, just tidal waves, and the difference in temperature between deep water ocean and shallow water ocean. That can create energy for us also. The IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says there's only one safe course of action. We need to try to keep our increase in average global temperature under or at 1.5 degrees centigrade. If we allow it to continue the way it is now with our fossil fuel use, by 2100, we'll have an increase of 5 degrees centigrade on the Earth. That's 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, I don't have to tell you what that means. The Earth will not be the same. Why are ethical questions more salient at global scale? We've seen more and more pictures like this in the last 10 years. We've even seen pictures like this in the United States, and this is going to be coming more frequently, unfortunately. This is my last slide. I want you to watch what happens here in North America. I will tell you the dates as this goes through from 1880 to 2017. You can see as this becomes more yellow and more orange, how we have heated up. '80s, 1890s, 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950, 1960, 1970, not too bad. 1980, now it starts getting worse. 1990, 2000, 2010, 2017. So you could see how that changes dramatically. The rest are my other items that I've given you on the handouts. I'm going to allow now for some question and answers. And then in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to share with you some inspiring narrative and some positives to leave you on. A lot of what I gave you there was not really positive, but I'll let Kim
I'm here.
let me know if there's anything in the chat. If not, we can just unmute ourselves and ask questions that way.
We do have one in the chat from Dr. Rothaker. He says, can you comment on Dr. Stephen Kunin's book, Unsettled, which does not deny a warming climate, but suggests that models predicting these dire consequences all have fudge factors that can be manipulated to show what you want, and that human-produced atmospheric carbon only contributes to a few percent to the climate warming.
Well, again, I'm not familiar with that book per se, Jerry, but you will find folks out there who are not in the mainstream climate science, if you will. Again, the statistics that the IPCC is going on are from hundreds of scientists, actually thousands of scientists all across the world who claim that these predictions, if anything, especially in the last few years, if anything, are under predicting what's going to happen with the rapidity that it's going to happen. So yeah, we can take, you see this with immunizations, for example, et cetera. But the predominance, the overwhelming predominance, over 97% of the climate scientists in the world today say that these predictions actually are well within the realm of possibility. Other questions out there?
No other questions, but there's a comment from Marlene Arnold. She says, my parents, who were born and raised in Lancaster County, always tell stories of crossing the frozen Susquehanna by horse and buggy in the winter.
Yes, and I have talked to some of the old ophthalmologists, for example, that are no longer living, and they would tell me that they would be skating on the ponds in Lancaster County from November through March. And I can tell you, I'm not as old as they were, but I was doing the same things in Massachusetts when I was growing up, and you can't do that today. So just within our lifetime, we have seen significant changes in the climate. Thanks, Marlene, for that. I appreciate that. Other questions out there?
If anyone has any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Otherwise, I'll give you some good news. I don't see anybody unmuting, so this is shared with me by a friend, Polly Ann Brown, who lives at Landis Homes. This is from a summary from Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who is an atmospheric scientist from Texas Tech University. This was given at a 2021 virtual Appalachia Region Conference. She starts out, the best way to inspire people to care about and take action on climate change is through a grassroots movement. Talk to people, have conversations. Dr. Hayhoe cited a man in England who, after one of her lectures, went back to his hometown of over 300,000 people and was able to report back to her on the 10,000 conversations his initial conversation sparked. Two key themes. First, people tend not to be concerned about climate change because they believe it does not affect them. It affects people in distant lands, and it's not a present threat. Second, climate change does not belong on a list of priorities because it affects every priority: racial equality, mental and physical health, our family and friends, children and young people around the world, all living creatures. decisions about where to live, what to buy, what to eat, our water, the future, etc. And number two, climate change is integral to every aspect of our lives. These two themes mean that we need to make climate change relevant to people's lives, how it affects each of us here and now. Says Dr. Hayhoe, bring it close, bring it here, bring it now. Dr. Hayhoe stressed the need to be hopeful ourselves and in our conversations. Scaring people with doomsday data, which I hope I didn't do with you today, and or speculations and making them feel guilty are not motivators. People need to feel empowered. Conversations ought to include suggestions for concrete and doable actions. And that's why I have that one handout of mine there on personal solutions that has lots of doable actions by individuals. We care because of who we are, e.g., person of faith, person of color, grandfather, birder, B-I-R-D-E-R, architect, etc. were a few of the responses to her question, who are you? So, the positives, if you will. This is from Future Crunch, which you can Google later if you want to get all of these. I'll just give you a few of these. Doom and gloom is never the full story. Underneath all of that, the tectonic shifts of energy transition continue, driven by a simple piece of economic logic. It is now cheaper to save the world than it is to ruin it. Here's some examples. 2021 was a record breaker for renewables globally, with 227 gigawatts. A gigawatt is a billion watts. 227 gigawatts of new capacity installed, a 4.7 increase over 2020 levels. Storage grew threefold, while offshore wind installations doubled compared to 2020. Solar additions of 180 gigawatts meant more solar was added this year, 2021, than the combined record for coal and gas capacity additions this century. Early stage investment in climate tech companies skyrocketed, tipping over $50 billion in 2021. And the proportion of venture capital dollars going into climate tech soared from around 6% to 14%. On the flip side, finance continued to flee fossil fuels. Swiss Re closed a major loophole in the reinsurance market. Citigroup became the first major US bank to rule out coal plant expansions. And the Asian Development Bank ended all financing for coal mining and plants. And the Federal Bank of India said it would not finance any new coal, a first for an Indian financial institution. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the world's largest, sold its entire portfolio of companies focused on oil exploration and production. The Dutch APB, the world's fifth largest pension fund, said it was divesting from all fossil fuel companies. South Korea's National Pension Service, the world's third largest pension fund, ceased all coal investments, as did First Rand, Africa's biggest bank, and the AIA Group, Asia's largest Asian insurance company. Following the COP meeting in Glasgow, 90% of the global economy is now covered by national net zero emission targets, up from 68% in 2020. So up from 68 to 90%. We now have almost a universal acceptance of the 1.5 degree centigrade target. That's a big step forward. It's pretty much impossible to now finance new coal, and the cost of capital is more than 20% for offshore oil, 12% for liquid natural gas, and just 4% for renewables. Like we said, it's cheaper to save the world than it is to ruin it. I want to share another comment from psychology end of things. The science is clear. If we continue to emit greenhouse gases at the same rate we have been doing in the past decades, our planet will be at least 4 degrees warmer in the next 50 to 80 years. Normally, we respond to danger quickly. We put out fires, run away when we feel at risk, and protect our children in every way we can. So why are people so slow to react to the existence of the threat of global warming? In evolutionary terms, we are not built for this kind of danger, explains Andreas Ernst, professor of environmental systems analysis and environmental psychology at the University of Kassel. I believe that's in Germany. We react to a rustling in the bushes with lightning speed, but the threat posed by climate change is abstract. The Earth's warming is not immediate, but gradual, and without a direct or immediate impact on our everyday actions. Ernst says the complex